So one of the results of these vertical and horizontal integrations, as well as these mergers that we talked about, is that a lot of these giant companies will become monopolies or almost monopolies. And again, we talked about that word monopoly, meaning that you control the majority, really 100% of a market share or of an industry. So again, if we use like our Coke and Pepsi example, if you have a monopoly in soda, you control 100% of the market for soda. Because a lot of these monopolies are controlled by the boards and so forth, they become known as trusts, and we'll talk about that when we get to the progressive era in the next unit, where where the government will basically break up these trusts, or will become known as trust busters. But for now, just understand these larger companies are called trusts. So if you see that word, it's what we're talking about. These board of trustees are being run by these large corporations are being run by these board of trustees or trusts. Now, these monopolists are going to use their wealth in a variety of ways. We talked about like J.P. Morgan using it to bail out different railroad companies, and Rockefeller and Carnegie really kind of being the philanthropists for their time period. We're working on this idea of gospel of wealth also, and the idea is that it argues that God's will is for some men to gain wealth so they can serve the public. That it is their duty to kind of take care of the poor, the less fortunate. This idea of social Darwinism also going to be tied to this, that the idea that the natural competition weeds out the weak and survives this, or allows for the strong to survive. Think of it like, again, like we talked about in class, the idea of survival of the fittest. Same way with our idea of evolution in science class. Social Darwinism is the same factor. The idea that the higher classes or the better people will survive over time and the weak will die off. It's important to make sure, again, that we understand the government is using these laissez-faire policies toward big business, so they're not really kind of manufacturing, they're not really kind of looking at them, they're allowing them to do whatever they wish. These corporations can merge as they want to, they can sell products as they want to, and so forth. Again, the laissez-faire meaning hands-off, or allowing the market share to be individualized. This lack of regulation allows for business to become very powerful and in some cases exploitive. We talked about before somebody like Rockefeller who would use his power to kind of sway Congress or to sway government in certain policies. So again, make sure we understand this idea of the gospel of wealth. It's kind of the religion of the industrialization period. This idea that wealth can no longer be looked upon as bad. That you're not bad for being wealthy, but it is your job, it is your duty to really kind of help those who are not as fortunate. It is viewed kind of as a sign of God's approval, and this will be taken very loosely into the 19th and 20th centuries. Think about if you've ever seen the movie Titanic. The people who are aboard the first class, the Rose's family, they think of themselves pretty highly. They see themselves as God's people, or they have very much God's approval. They are better than that of the lower class, or the people down in the third lowest classes of cargo, or of seating, I'm sorry. And what also ties into this gospel wealth, or why we call it the gospel wealth, is not that it's just your job to do it because it's your job. It is that it's a Christian duty, so it has some religious base into this as well, that it is your job to accumulate wealth, that you shouldn't help the poor, as far as with Carnegie, what we'll see, that allowing for philanthropists to give money in terms of whether it be schools or museums or infrastructure or service social programs, whatever it might be. Okay. And that's kind of where he differs from that of our last gentleman, who was Russell Conwell, who believed that you should not help the poor. Andrew Carnegie is more of the kind that you should help the poor. And what comes from him is this idea that inequality is inevitable, that you will always have people of different class structures. Now, the idea should be that you should try to make it as close as you can, but you'll never be able to get rid of class differences. And that the wealthy should act as the trustees for their poor brethren. They should do whatever they can to help them, or to give them wealth, or to help them with a higher standard of living. And we read that in the Gospel of Wealth text in class. So a couple of conclusions here, things we want to make sure that we take away from during this Industrial Revolution. And when we get to our last topic as far as urbanization, we'll see this as well. The idea that America is going to be changed as far as becoming really the leader in innovation, whether it be the increasing number of patents and entrepreneurship. It will start to slowly become the wealthiest nation in the world, and it also become the leader in world industry as well, especially with the steel plant with Carnegie, to make more steel than any other country in the world. These laissez-faire government policies and new business tactics will lead to a creation of monopolies like in the Standard Oil industry, and also it will allow for businesses to grow very, very rapidly and achieve all sorts of new types of wealth. We're also going to see an end to this laissez-faire when we get to the 1900s with the Progressive Era. But also there's a huge gap between the wealthy monopolists and the poor immigrant workers. And then we also saw with the Gospel of Wealth some different views on how to either merge the gaps between poor and rich, and also what should the rich and poor be doing in societies as well. All right, so I hope this helps, guys. Make sure you guys review this, have notes for class on Wednesday, and we'll go over and talk about it then. Make sure you come in with questions as well so we can go through a little Q&A, and I'll see you then.